Hello and welcome, everyone. Michiko, Moni, and I are really excited to share what we've been working on. I'm Raquel, a product manager at the Army Software Factory, and I'm co-presenting with the wonderful Michiko, a product manager in VMware Tanzu Labs public sector, and the fabulous Moni, a product designer in VMware Tanzu Labs public sector. And we're here to talk to you about trauma-informed software practices. While agile methods of conducting user research focus on efficiency and iterative products, this process overlooks the impact it has on end users. So in this talk, we really want to share our experience conducting user research with people who have experienced a traumatic event and share our lessons learned and those trauma-informed principles that we use that ensured minimal cognitive load on part of the user while reducing the risk of reliving traumatic experiences. Hopefully you'll walk away from this talk with an application of the trauma-informed framework and practices to leverage in user research practices. Next slide, please. Great, so our learning objectives for this talk are firstly to define the term trauma-informed and share the software development principles that we created. And secondly, by the end of this talk, we really hope that you can walk away with a concrete user research practice. And next slide. Perfect. So we're going to first define trauma and trauma-informed, talk through what our principles are for that trauma-informed software development, what typical research methods miss, and then we'll go through what our practices are. So let's get started. So Michiko, Moni, and I originated this work on a product that we worked together. The primary users were people that have experienced a traumatic event. And so while we were working through researching that space, we realized that Agile and Lean methodologies alone, they don't consider the prevalence of trauma in all user populations. So while Agile and Lean do not account for the health and well-being of users, another practice we use, user-centered design, discovers where users are today, but not necessarily where they may be trying to go. So just as user-centered design often makes products better for all people, these principles and practices help the product orient to the user rather than the other way around. How does this actually affect software development teams? In the United States, men are at greater risk than women, but to being exposed to stressful events. So there actually is a really high prevalence of exposure to these traumatic events. That being said, having an impact is actually twice among women as it is among men. And this is all conducted from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, who publishes a report annually. And we can go to the next slide. So given that 60 to 70% of the adult US population is said to have experienced trauma, we really want to create software pieces that consider that at least 60% of our end users may have been activated by these patterns. Beyond a space that we know users are likely traumatized, all of our software tools should have this assumption that at least 60% of our end users have some kind of trauma in their past. So when we develop software, we should really use those trauma-informed practices. And we've been using this word a lot. What actually is trauma? So when using this presentation, it is the state resulting from experiencing an event or events that cause an extremely high level of stress, and where living through these traumatic events results in a change in one's health and well-being. So we really want to emphasize that this is a change in one's health and well-being, and it's critical to determining whether the traumatic event actually caused trauma. And this distinguishes trauma from an experience that was disturbing or unsettling, but didn't really cause that change in health and well-being. And we'll actually revisit this theme of change throughout the presentation.
Thanks, Raquel. I'll take it over from here. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history about the term trauma-informed. So this term was actually originated when medical practitioners observed a pattern of behavioral symptoms in veterans of the Vietnam War. So classically in the medical field, trauma means sort of physical injury or symptoms associated with physical illness. However, because of the observations of medical practitioners during the Vietnam War, they began to use the term trauma to also include behavioral symptoms or psychological symptoms. And so now, interestingly, that has evolved to the point where in everyday conversation, when we say trauma, people often mean these psychological impacts. So the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in the United States defines trauma-informed as one that fills 3 criteria. So organizations that want to be trauma-informed, or our practices, for example, fulfill these 3 criteria. The first is awareness of prevalence of trauma. The second is recognition that trauma impacts everyone differently. And the final one is responding by putting that knowledge into practice. So in our work, we were unable to find trauma-informed software practices to follow that our team could use to move our work forward. So we began to build our own. And we found that the existing material from other disciplines like architecture, they left out necessary building blocks for creating this new community of trauma-informed software practitioners. So we did a little extra research. We dug a bit deeper and referenced frameworks for creating inclusive organizations, and we studied the characteristics of oppression. Once we combined all of that, what we came to are principles for ethical software development, not just for trauma-informed or trauma experiencing populations, but for all populations. That's why these principles will improve products not only in the aforementioned traumatized space, but really any product intended for humans. So the following principles were created to help product teams stay focused on the well-being of their users. For the purposes of this talk, we'll share the principles at a pretty high level. Each of the 2 themes that we will share encompass 5 principles, but we'll be just saying at kind of a higher level and describing the 2 themes of our principles. The first one is promoting deliberate health. And what does that mean? Software is inherently a digital experience. However, we can still treat our users as whole beings. Our users' life experience encompasses a wide array of dimensions. Their health and wellness relies on their ability to balance and navigate these many dimensions. It's the responsibility of the software organization and the software team to promote deliberate healing through the 5 principles in this theme. The second theme is guide with altruistic intentions. So a good product orients its users to the intended experience. However, a great product orients the product to the lived experience of the user. It's the responsibility of the software organization and software team to guide with altruistic intentions through the 5 principles in this theme. And I know we didn't list each of the 5 principles in the themes. So if you'd like to learn more, please reach out to us. We did publish an internal VMware article on this, and we would love to share our work with you. So now I'm going to hand it over to Moni to talk about how this applies to user research.
Thank you so much, Michiko. Like Michiko said, a great product is lends itself through how much we spend time and become empathetic with the experience that the user have gone through or are going through. Not only in the medical world, but now we are talking about how we are going to embed it into our software application development. So now that we have learned about people first principles, let's talk about something that most of us are familiar with, which is a typical user research methods. For example, user interviews, field observation, usability testing, and many more. And if you go to the next slide, users in the design paradigms emphasize the need for researchers to deeply understand our end users and their experiences. This work often requires researchers to directly ask participants about their past experiences through interviews, conversation, focus groups, surveys, or workshops, you name it. These forms of participant engagement may cause re-traumatization, which is also known as cognitive effort, to relive trauma experiences. We will unpack how researchers can apply people-first practices to conduct user research in trauma-informed ways. Before we deep dive into those practices that I'm about to walk you through, let's talk about our heroes. I would like to introduce a common term that my software development team used when referring to our users, because our users were often introduced to us as victims or survivors. After consulting with experts and having great conversation with our stakeholders who can deeply empathize with our user, we decided that we will refer to our user as our heroes, because not only they survived, but they stepped up to make the difference for others. All right, well, let's take a look at how we apply trauma-informed principles into our research. After doing a bunch of trauma-informed literature reviews, article reviews, we discover some pattern that suggests areas of focus to help researchers consciously work to minimize the potential for harm or re-traumatization for our heroes. And we name it people-first software practices. It consists of 6 practices, if you want to go to the next slide, which are safety, trust, peer support, collaboration, enablement, and intersectionality. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one, which is safety. The notion of safety in trauma-informed care means ensuring a physical and safe environment, as well as psychological safety. And safety can be pursued by ensuring that the research takes place in a location that is safe and familiar to participants. In this case, our research team provided a really safe environment for our end users. When we talked about conducting user interviews, we made sure we conducted user interviews in an area where there's not so much noise level going on. We blur the background so that doesn't become the noise that the user would be distracted or would have to worry about. We also asked our heroes to help us understand what could be deemed as safety environment for them before we go into the user interviews as well. And we also set expectations up front with the stakeholders so that they have a sense of understanding on what they are walking into. And then sometimes we will bring in observers, which are some of our team members. After they introduce themselves, they would be asked to be off camera, so that we provide that psychological safety to our heroes as they are talking about their past experiences. The next one, which is trust. Trust in others is essential to developing healthy relationships. The key to trustworthy in our research process is ensuring that artifacts, processes, and organizations operate transparently. In this case, we worked with the psychologists and trauma specialists to craft prompts and questions, set research session expectations, even share those expectations prior to the research sessions begin. Share the interview questions with our heroes before they join the session so that they have a sense of control of what they are going to talk about and what they don't want to talk about. Also, spend time getting to know each other before we begin the research session. And then practice active listening, because we have learned during our user research activities that it's really helpful to listened versus trying to agree or disagree or trying to say it's going to be okay. Again, as researchers, we are not expert in trauma psychology. So the best thing that you could do in the user research session is to basically practice active listening. And then mirror their language. Basically, once we listen enough, we will be able to begin using the typical language that they use to gain that trust from our heroes. The next one, which is peer support. In the peer support, heroes share their stories and live experience with each other, which builds trust, creates hope, enhances safety, and overcomes a sense of isolation that often follows from traumatic events. In this case, sometimes we would include another hero in our research activities. For our situation, we happen to have one of the stakeholders that have had a traumatic experience before, and often she would join one of our user interview sessions. Sometimes it is recommended that we could look into an activity like focus groups over individual interviews, bring in people who have been through this similar experience so that our heroes don't have to feel like they are alone in this journey. And then provide professional support during research sessions and after research sessions. Basically, we let our heroes know upfront if any point in time they feel like they need a break, they need help, we have that help ready and available for them to use. The next one, which is collaboration. Collaboration means ensuring that heroes are actively involved in decisions regarding their care and support. In this case, we involve our heroes as our co-researchers and co-creators through user interviews and usability testing. All the questions, showing them the prototypes of our software products, it's another way to get them to be part of this co-creation of the team. Give them an active voice in telling their stories, essentially going back to what I mentioned earlier about active listening. Basically, as a researcher, giving them the space to actually talk about their experiences and be there to listen and give them an ability to navigate through their stories. That is such a really strong recommendation. Involve trauma and mental health professionals in the development and research processes and practices. This is where we involve the professionals during like creating the questions of the user interviews, and also as we are progressing through our research activities, like such as looking into synthesizing our data to make sure what we are learning is actually what our heroes have been experiencing, and that would be helpful for our heroes. The next thing, which is enablement. Enablement refers to facilitating and developing opportunities for people to fulfill their potential and to develop their own capacity. So setting enablement as a goal allows allows the research team to recognize the impact of the design and the research activities. For example, how we come up with questions, wording of the interview questions matters in giving people greater control over their decision and well-being. This can involve establishing their shared decision-making between users and technological artifacts, but also providing the necessary transparency and information to enable users to make informed choices. We also honored enablement by clearly communicating choices of skipping the questions at any point in time, or our heroes can stop their participation in the research activities at any point in time as well. They can also revoke the consent during the research as well, as providing referral paths after the research if the participant becomes distressed. Last but not least, intersectionality goes beyond accounting for identity in the form of checking the boxes of gender, race, and class. Since trauma is tied to people's identities in both their own life experiences and their historical and generational traumas, research process should therefore contend with intersectionality to create trauma-informed spaces. In this case, our team seek information about social identities prior to the research sessions. Basically, we try our best and spend a lot of time on getting to know about the user, where they're coming from, and if their social life has been impacted or created the impact to their life experience, so that we have some sort of empathy going into our research sessions with our heroes. And the last one, which is provide a space to express life experience. Again, I can't stress enough on how much active listening is so important. Providing the space for them to tell their stories, express their life experience, and be there to listen is such a powerful tool for any research type. That's it from me. Next, Raquel is going to walk us through some takeaways that we have seen and observed.
I'm actually going to pivot over to Michiko, who's going to close us out.
Yep, thank you so much. So at the end here, we're just going to go over some of the key takeaways and share some information about next steps. So throughout this talk, we have discussed how relying on trauma experts throughout the process is incredibly important. Something that Moni always says is that we are not trauma experts, and that's by design. It's not our job to be the trauma expert throughout the whole process. That's why we rely on SMEs and experts to give us the information. Our job is just to be the empathetic person in the room and to try to be aware of the prevalence of trauma and incorporate that into our practices. Also, the importance of having a psychologist available during research activities. This can be having them on standby or having them in the interview process. It really just depends on what is going to work best for the research that you're setting up. Another really important piece is to avoid comforting the heroes, for example, saying things like, it's okay, or don't worry about it. They are strong and brave, and giving them the space to continue on in their own way that works best for them is the most supportive thing that we can do. The final thing is researchers. Make sure that as researchers, you and your team are taking care of yourself. This can look like making time at the end of your research sessions to debrief or connect with each other, and just be aware of how you're doing throughout the research process, and make sure that you're giving yourself time to rest and recharge, and be aware that being in contact with this kind of information can be draining for you. All right, and in summary, there's a few things that you can do moving forward from here. So we, of course, would love you to try these principles and practices. Please get a hold of us. Our emails are in our bios, and we would love to talk to you more about not only the principles and practices, but perhaps how to shape them to your own work environment. You can also contact us for our research guidelines. This is a document that we created and used during our research process to help make sure that we're transforming the typical user research patterns into these people-first practices. And finally, as I mentioned before, we did write a VMware-facing article, and we would love to share kind of a generalized version of that content with you all. So please reach out to us. We would love to talk to you more. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope this has been a really wonderful learning opportunity for you all. Thank you. Looking forward to getting in contact with you. Have a wonderful day.